Good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and I'm very happy that you've chosen to spend a bit of time with us this Monday evening. If you are watching from Central Oklahoma tonight, I ask that you keep one eye out the window and watch the weather, because I know there are areas within the state of Oklahoma that are experiencing some significant rain and potential bad weather tonight. So do take care of yourselves. I want to say very quickly a word of thanks to my guest last week, Chief Philip Banks, who was the Chief of Department of NYPD, was here with us, and I very, very much appreciated his thinking around building community and police partnerships. If by chance you happen to not have seen that episode, I hope that you will take a moment and check that out. You can always find it on our YouTube page. But tonight we're focusing on another issue, a topic that's important to Oklahomans in general, but certainly to families of color, people who experience a very different experience actually within the criminal justice system. We're talking tonight about criminal justice reform. My guest is an attorney here in Oklahoma City. He works for Banks, Gillette, and Gillette. He is not just an attorney, he's also an advocate for young people, is a great motivator for young people. I happened to mention to a young woman this weekend that he was going to be my guest this evening, and she said, "Oh, he is so great." So with that, I'm very happy to welcome to the Hamilton Report my guest this evening, Lorenzo Banks. Lorenzo, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it. You know, it's hard to listen to you and not sit over here blushing a bit, because I'm so flattered by the kind words by you and other folks in the community. I'm very appreciative. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
You know, the first time I heard you referred to as a superhero lawyer, I really thought that was all about your courtroom work. And in fact, that has a part to play in that moniker. But I've also learned that you do a great deal of work within the community, and that makes you the right person to have with us this evening to talk about criminal justice reform. You got into the law almost by accident, if I recall. You decided to represent yourself pro se before you had ever gone to law school. You won your case, and that was the impetus for you moving into the law as a career.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. Certainly was. I'm a mathematician by trade, so I certainly didn't expect myself having Esquire at the end of my name. And now that I've done it, who knew that I was walking into my destiny?
Well, I'm scared of anybody who's a mathematician by trade, so you're 2 steps ahead of me. I want to look at some statistics, Lorenzo. Here in the United States, we only have 4% of the world's population, and yet we represent a very sizable number of people who are incarcerated. Mm-hmm. In fact, we have 25% of the imprisoned population throughout the world, and again, we're only 4% of the population. Give us some background. How did it grow so much just in the last 30 years?
You know, Scott, you know, it truly is a phenomenon here that is hard to explain, right? I think we as Americans believe that the answer to the deterrence of crime is incarceration, that it is the forefront, it is the method at the front of things to actually fix crimes being committed here in the United States. And certainly, as we look around, we see that it's not necessarily the best option for us. You know, my mom would say things to me if I made a decision, and if I obviously fell on my face from it, she'd say, "How'd that turn out for you?" I oftentimes ask America, you know, how'd that turn out for us? That we incarcerate so many people, and yet we don't have necessarily a sound rate of deterrence from crime. Recidivism is still at an all-time high. People still commit crimes. So we have to ask ourselves as a nation, is this really working? And are there other feasible alternatives?
And I think that that's a very important question, because we're hearing an awful lot these last couple of weeks about law and order.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. We tend to think as society in this country that we just lock people up and that will deter them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's certainly not the case if we have 2.2 million Americans incarcerated right this minute. 2.2 million people. That's a lot of people, Lorenzo.
Yeah, yeah, it's a whole lot of people, and as you look at these numbers, certainly there are some of those folks who have been purposefully and truly committing crimes, but with 2.2 million folks being incarcerated, you have to ask yourself: is it truly that we're dealing with innately nefarious people, or are we dealing with folks who have mental health disorders? Are we dealing with people that don't necessarily understand the consequences of their actions? They do it. They understand enough, but do they understand enough, or do they have the mental state to actually understand that what they're doing and the repeated pattern of these behaviors, what they're doing is going to always have them ending up in some jail, in the throes of a jail cell? Yes,
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, because you said something, and then one of our viewers just made a comment on it and said that counseling is an integral part of reform.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a pretty easy concept to grasp, and yet that's not one that we have widely embraced in this country. Oklahoma has had some very, very good results in drug courts.
Mm-hmm.
They're horribly underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people who are able to go through a drug court, pull themselves together, get the treatment they need, and the reentry back into being a productive member of society, their rate of recidivism is much, much lower.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
how come we're not embracing that? How come we are not using more mental health professionals instead of all law enforcement?
Yeah, and I think it really does come down to money. I think it does. Mental health programs and counseling programs for folks out in the community is going to cost the government quite a bit more than just throwing them into a jail cell. And ultimately, when we throw them into that jail cell, let's just be honest, we make the defendant pay for their stay in the jail, right? So once they're out, they're paying back their cost of the cost of their stay in that jail. I do believe that it comes down to money. And
yes, we're spending $182 billion a year,
right,
folks incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
That's an enormous amount of money going to private prisons,
Mm-hmm.
to state prisons, and that's not just the cost of housing and feeding them,
Right.
Also the cost of the families that my God, when you look at calling home, calling your family from prison, your family is then charged outrageous rates for that phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does not just affect one person. It rolls through a family and through a community, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it certainly does. I try to tell people when I have this conversation in small groups that the criminal justice reform, if it's not reformed, right, we're talking about the desolation of communities across the United States, right? That people forget that and I think that's where we have a problem here, Scott. We forget that the very people that we're locking up are members of our community. They make up the community. And so when you interrupt and sever these people from their families, you are destroying the community. Now, I know some people will say, well, what other means are there? What's other feasible alternatives are there? Those are good questions, right? But certainly, if giving you an example, if I know a brother don't have a whole lot of hair up here, right? But if I did have hair and my hair was on fire, and if my hair was on fire and I'm trying to put my hair out with gasoline, And you come up and say, oh my God, Lorenzo, what are you doing? That's gas. And I say, well, I hear what you're saying, Scott, but this is what I know to put out the fire. Well, Lorenzo, that's the bad idea. That's the wrong way to do it. And then I say, well, Lorenzo, excuse me, Scott, what other alternatives do you have? What do you say? What else should I do? And you say, well, I don't know exactly what. Maybe we should use a fire extinguisher. Maybe we should try to smother it with some type of powder or flour or something like that. But I know for certain that putting gasoline on the fire on your head is probably not the best way. And in the words of my mother, how'd that be? Right? I think that's what we're dealing with here in the United States, is that we're desolating our communities and ripping families apart when there may be a feasible alternative. Do we necessarily have the perfect alternative right now? And I can't necessarily articulate a plan of action right now. No. But how'd that turn out for you? How's it working so far? So far, it's destroying our communities, and our communities make up the United States. We're hurting our country. There's got to be a better way to do this.
Let's talk about women for a moment. You're talking about destroying communities. The number of women incarcerated in this country grew by 750% over a really short period of time, less than 30 years. That's an increase of 750%. The state of Oklahoma imprisons more women than any place on the planet. So that means per capita, we have more women in our jails and prisons in Oklahoma than anywhere else in the world. These are not just numbers, as you point out. These are mothers, they are daughters, they are sisters, they are wives, they are employees. What happens to the family when a woman goes to jail?
Assuming that dad's there, right? Dad is now thrusted into a situation where he is now a single parent. If dad is not there, these kids, we're scrambling, trying to find either family members or children going into the system, because we incarcerated a mother who, even if she is guilty of the alleged crime, there may have been a better alternative rather than ripping this woman away from her children. And then we ask these kids to grow up. You know, you've been ripped away from mom for when mom's been accused of a crime that she didn't necessarily have to be incarcerated for purposes of rehabilitation. So we rip mom away from kids and then ask these kids to grow up and live normal lives and be productive members of society. Really? Surely we see the trickle down effect of what it is to almost disproportionately, right? From Oklahoma is the worst, right? Of incarcerating women, disproportionately incarcerating women in such a way that it is destroying the very lives of young children, which young children grow up to be adults. And then you wonder why these young children are now part of your criminal justice system. Here they are adults. This is all they know because you ripped mom away from them at a young age when mom could have been rehabilitated through some other means. This is a serious problem and certainly something that we need to get a hold of, especially in my home state, your home state, Scott, right here in the state of Oklahoma.
You know, pardon me, the Democratic Party has never called for defunding police. That's a dog whistle for a problem.
Yeah.
I cannot personally say I want to defund the police. The Oklahoma Democratic Party's never said that. It's not a part of the national platform. But I wonder if instead of defunding the police, if we could use another word, which is refund. In other words, allocate the monies differently. How much would that prevent someone actually winding up in the criminal justice system?
Right. And I would think that it would help to certainly give people different paths down away from the criminal justice system. Or if they are in the criminal justice system, we have other options to use to rehabilitate this person. Right now in Oklahoma, we've kind of got this archaic, draconian way of just, hey, they've got a problem, throw them in a room for X amount of time and just wait till they get better. That's like you catching the flu, Scott. And I say, okay, just go lock him in a room and we'll wait for him to get better. Scott doesn't get better unless we actually treat him, right? We've got to do things to help Scott, not just lock him in a room and kind of forget about him. If we are able to, and as a criminal defense lawyer, I will say it openly, I do not want to defend the police, because guess what, Scott? If someone's breaking into my house, I'm not calling you. I'm calling police officers. We need police officers. We need good, well-trained, respectful, community-minded police officers. And so I don't want to defund the police, but possibly, as you say, reallocating some of those funds for potentially some other types of options that can lead people away from the throes of a jail cell for purposes of rehabilitation in the criminal justice system, such as counseling, such as mental health services, such as giving more money to these drug court programs. Trust me, Scott, I'm a criminal defense lawyer who has put people in those drug court programs. They work.
They do work.
They work.
We have good evidence of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Now, the problem is with them is that they are expensive. They can be expensive for the participants. And so oftentimes when folks who are caught up in the criminal justice system, they oftentimes are not the most well suited to be able to afford these particular programs. So maybe a reallocation of this funding for purposes of funding these programs, not on the backs of the defendants, but on some other way, other funding, so that these people can actually reap the benefits of the program and not be worried about, good Lord, how do I afford it? Because if I can't afford it, I might find myself in the throes of a jail cell, right? If they don't pay, then they get kicked out of the program. And now you're going back to square one. And I'm going to find myself potentially being locked up for a crime that I can be rehabilitated through a great program. I just don't have the money for it.
But yet we have the money to keep someone locked up for years on end. We can find that money. Mm-hmm. Something's wrong with the system where we cannot find the money to treat people.
Right.
We, like you said, a person can't afford it. So all of a sudden, then they're thrown out of the program. What happens then? They wind back in the system.
Right.
And, let's talk about money for a minute.
Okay.
I don't think it's a big secret that the outcome in a criminal trial largely depends not on guilt or innocence, but on how much money you have.
Yeah.
Which automatically skews away from people of color, mm-hmm. Black and brown people, and how often they are incarcerated proportionally. It's not because more crimes are being committed by them. Mm-hmm. It's because they don't have the resources either in the community, in court, and then certainly once they're in jail.
Yes, sir.
How do we go about creating some kind of equality here where because it's a joke, frankly, to call it the justice system, because it's not. Mm-hmm. How do we begin to balance it?
It's kind of justice for hire, right? It's the best justice that money can buy, right? And if you don't have the money, then you can't buy justice. And this is coming from a private criminal defense lawyer. Although I make my money, make some of my living off of this, I'm not blind. I see that oftentimes people are really cut short due to the fact that their pocketbooks aren't that big. It is tough to say, Scott, how do we come up with, because I've been wrapping around, I've been doing this almost 10 years now, and I'm trying to wrap my head around what can we do to level the playing field for folks who may not be as well off financially as others. Because I tell you, my suburban rich kid who gets popped for something and I have to go and represent him usually has a much better shake than my kid who's from the inner city, whose mom and dad are hardworking blue collar workers, but they just don't have the resources that my suburban kid does. And I can, when I'm in his defense, I can do much more for my suburban kid because he's got the money to fund his defense. I can go and get the right experts. I can go and get the right witnesses to speak on his behalf. But my poor clients do not have that. There has got to be a way that we set this up such that the criminal justice system is not so dependent upon the almighty dollar of the defendant, right? Because otherwise, is it really justice? And so, yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
It's not justice. And earlier this summer, the chair of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, Alicia Andrews, held a press conference because of something that outrageously occurred at the hands of Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater. Within the scope of 2 weeks, there were two crimes, alleged crimes. One was some property damage allegedly caused by some young Black men who were protesting for Black Lives Matter. Around that same time, there was in Edmond, which is still Oklahoma County, there was a white couple who beat almost to death a man because he was gay. Now, they were charged with a misdemeanor and sent home. The Black kids that I mentioned a moment ago, those kids were charged with terrorism, held on outrageously high bonds. So we really are talking everything from law enforcement to the way a case is charged, all the way through the court system. So I recognize it. It's a huge undertaking, but we've got to start somewhere, Lorenzo. Where do we start?
Yeah, and so I think one of the places that we start is we've got to get more funding for public defense counsel, right? Public defenders. We've got to get more public defenders, right? Everyone cannot afford me. Everyone cannot. And if someone is, our public defenders are stretched way too thin, at least here in the state of Oklahoma. And my assumption is that this is a problem nationwide, but I can speak to Oklahoma for certain. I know that they're stretched too thin. They're my friends, right? I know many of these public defenders and those folks who work for the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System, right? They're stretched too thin. They've got too many clients, but they have a defense, right? But the idea of finding a way to where, right now, Scott, I don't know if you know this. If you post bond in the state of Oklahoma, it's not a guarantee that you'll lose your right to a public defender, but almost, right? In so many instances. So you post a measly $200 to get out so you can go back to work, right? Because I'm taking care of my family. And so you post that measly $200 or so on a $2,000 bond and you go back to work. And then you go to court and tell the judge, hey, the lawyers, that dang Lorenzo Banks is charging me thousands of dollars to do his case, which, ladies and gentlemen out there, I'm charging reasonable fees in the market, right? That is just what the market bears. And that's how much it costs to defend somebody in many of these cases. And a judge tells you, well, you posted bond. So you're more than likely not going to be given the opportunity to use the public defender's office.
That's crazy. I did not know that. So if you scrape together $20 a piece from 10 of your friends, that does not equate to paying for an attorney.
Exactly. And, and of course, now on one hand, it helps my business as a private attorney, right? Because all these people who post bond, you're more than likely going to have to come hire Lorenzo to take care of you. So on one hand, as a business owner, it's great for me, but at the same time, just like, with the with criminal justice reform here in the recent years, I understood with now most drug crimes now being misdemeanors, bad for my business, but great for the state of Oklahoma, great for the citizenry of the state of Oklahoma. It's the same thing here. It's bad for my business if more people are able to get public defenders, certainly, right? That's going to hurt my bottom line. But at the end of the day, what are we here for? Am I trying to make a killing here as a business, or am I trying to make sure that our community is strong and that folks are not getting railroaded by the system because they can't hire the best attorneys out there simply because they scrape together $200 to get out of jail? The latter is what I'm into. I want to make sure that folks can actually afford a defense that is adequate for them. Not to say that our public defenders aren't adequate. They're some of the best lawyers out there. Trust me, when I'm lost, I call the public defenders. They're great. When I don't know what I'm doing, I call the public defenders. But certainly, I believe that expanding the budget to get more lawyers and more resources for our public defender's office and our Oklahoma indigent defense system lawyers, to allow more people to be able to utilize those free services and not get those things yanked from them simply because they scraped together $200 to get out of jail and go back to work. I believe that's a starting point, right, Scott? At least you'll go back to work, and at least you'll have the counsel that you need, because we've got more than enough lawyers that are free. And you're truly considered indigent. If somebody makes $7.25 an hour minimum wage, you can't expect them to come and drop $10,000 into my office. You just can't, right? He or she is working as hard as they possibly can. But yet we do, because people are posting bond and not knowing that when you post bond, you're more than likely going to lose your right to a public defender.
But if you don't post bond, then you don't go to work, you lose your job, potentially lose your apartment or your home. Mm-hmm. Oh man. Okay. Yeah. You've got me pretty stirred up right now.
Sorry, Scott. Sorry,
bro. No, I'm not sorry, because this is a discussion that we must be having. One of our viewers commented a moment ago, we haven't even touched on the fact that oftentimes a felon loses his or her right to vote.
Yeah.
So now they're in a situation where they don't even have any control over the very people that are responsible for law and order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like I said, you have begun something here in this conversation that I hope will continue over dinner tables in Oklahoma. I hope it will continue among colleagues, people who have nothing to do with the law, but absolutely recognize that if we don't make substantive changes now, we're going to pay for this for generations to come. It will just get worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You've brought a lot to this discussion, and I'm so grateful for the time that you afforded us. And I hope that, as I said, that this is a discussion that we will continue. And I hope that you will definitely come back and join us again on the Hamilton Report.
Oh, without doubt. If I get an invite, I'll be here, brother, with bells on.
I promise we will ask you back. Lorenzo Banks, thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you again real soon. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring this topic up tonight is because I see the disparity that exists within the criminal justice system here in Oklahoma. Not saying that every place else is better, but this is our home. This is where we live and we work and we try our best to make life good for each other and for ourselves. It's when we take a moment to look around us that we can quickly see that what we're dealing with is a justice system that is unjust. So it's up to us to make decisions about who we vote for, the things that we support with our money and our time, to create a system by which all people are treated fairly, all people are accorded the same opportunities within law enforcement, within the criminal justice system, and within society as a whole. Thank you so much for being a part of our evening tonight. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, and I appreciate you being with us. I hope that you will share this with your friends. All of our shows are available at okdemocrats.org/YouTube. Until next week, have a good week. Take good care of yourself. And thank you for being with us. Good night.